Hey pre-AP Chemistry, this is Mr. Ayton, and this is Unit 7, Molar Calculations. We're out of chemical reactions, and we're into what's called molar calculations. And we are in week 12. What are we going to learn in week 12? We're going to take a look at the mole concept. Yes, that thing on your aunt's face, or that thing in your backyard. No, it is a mole, a chemistry mole. And we're going to take a look at particles, we're going to take a look at molar mass, we're going to take a look at mass, and how all of these things, these molar calculations, work together. In chemistry, we had to come up with this concept. A guy named Avogadro came up with this concept called the mole, and it was kind of developed over time. And it's very analogous to a dozen. If you think of a dozen, what is a dozen? It's 12. 12 of anything. So 12 eggs is equal to 1 dozen eggs. 12 dwarf planets is equal to 1 dozen dwarf planets. 12 roses is equal to 1 dozen roses, which means we can take a look. This is a ratio. The biggest thing in your mind is to think of the mole concept as simply a ratio, which means you can do any kind of ratio. If you know 1 dozen is equal to 12 of something, anything, then you know what happens when we have 2 dozen. 2 dozen is equal to 24 of anything. Half a dozen is equal to 6 of anything. And so you can see the dozen concept is simply a ratio, In the same way, the mole concept is simply a ratio. The mole is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd of anything. 1 mole of water contains 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd molecules of water. 1 mole of copper contains 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd copper atoms. 1 mole of carbon contains 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd carbon atoms. If you had 1 mole of planets, it would be 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd planets. If you have 1 mole of sodium chloride, you have 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd sodium ions, chloride ions, as well as sodium chloride formula units. Okay, a mole is equal to 1 mole is equal to 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd anything, which means you could know what half a mole is. You could know what 2 moles is. You could know what 2.3 moles is. It is simply a ratio. And that brings us to a thing called molar mass. Molar mass. This helps us to figure out how many grams of a substance are in 1 mole. So if we look at zinc and we look at the periodic table, zinc is 65.38 grams per 1 mole. And again, think of it as a ratio. If you know there's 65.38 grams of zinc for every 1 mole of zinc, then you can know if you only have a quarter of a mole, 0.25 moles, you can know how many grams of zinc you have. If you have 13 grams of zinc, you can know how many moles you have. And so you can figure out how many grams or how many moles you have by what's called the molar mass. Let's take a look at a compound like water, H2O. Hydrogen is worth 1.008, so 1.008 times 2, I'm just going to round that to 1 times 2, plus oxygen is 16, which means water is 18 grams per 1 mole. So if you have 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd particles of water, it's going to have a mass of 18 grams. If you only have half a mole, it's going to be 9 grams. If you have 2 moles, it'll be 36 grams. You can see it is simply a ratio. Now let's take a look at something like a big compound like C6H12O6. Well, carbon's 12, so 12 times 6. We have hydrogen is 1, if you remember. So 1 times 12, and oxygen 16. There's 6 times 16. And when we add all of this up, I get 180 grams for every 1 mole of this compound, which means if you have half a mole, you have 90 grams. If you have 90 grams, you have half a mole. It is simply a ratio. And we call that the molar mass. The molar mass relates the number of grams to the number of moles, or the number of moles to the number of grams. So let's take a look at a few examples. We have 2 main equations that you can kind of keep in mind. Is if you have grams, if you divide by molar mass, that gives you the number of moles. If you have the number of moles, you can multiply by the molar mass to get the number of grams or mass. So let's take a look here. Let's use this. We have 2.5 moles of zinc. So we have moles. So what are we going to do? We're going to multiply by the molar mass of zinc. Remember, the molar mass of zinc was 65.38 grams for every 1 mole. 65.38 grams for every 1 mole. So if I take 2.5 times 65.38, that gives me, I have 163.45 grams of zinc. And we always want to put our units and what it's assigned to. That's going to be very, very important. Put your number, your units, and what it's assigned to. Okay? So you can see 2.5 moles, 65.38 grams for every 1 mole, which means if you have 2.5 moles, it's going to be more than twice the amount, isn't it? Okay, and that's how many grams of zinc we would have. Now, if you don't know how to do this, if you forget your equations, which you're not, because I'm going to give you the equations, is you can set up a proportion. If you set up a proportion, do cross multiplying, you have it, no problem. Let's take a look at 4.5 grams. What do we do if we have grams? We're going to divide by molar mass. We're going to divide by molar mass. And so water, remember, was 18 grams for every 1 mole. So we're going to divide by 18 grams for every 1 mole. And you can see 4.5 grams divided by 18 grams per 1 mole. And that gives me 0.25 moles of water. Remember, always put your number, your units, and what it's assigned to. And so this went from grams divided by molar mass, and it gives me 1/4 mole. Now think about it. If water is 18 grams for every 1 mole, and we have 4.5 grams, do you see why that's 0.25 moles? Again, it's just a ratio. If you don't know how to do it, set up a proportion. Then we have 3.01 times 10 to the 23rd molecules. Okay, now remember, we know 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd of anything. Let's take a look at molecules. That equals 1 mole. Okay, 1 mole. And I have 3.01, that's an awful 3.01 times 10 to the 23rd molecules. I'm going to set up a proportion because it is proportional. Okay, so think of it. 6 times 10 to the 23rd is equal to 1 mole. 3 times 10 to the 23rd would be equal to 1/2 mole of C6H12O6. Okay, and so you can see I'm going to put my units and what it's assigned to. So if you have moles, well, if we come back and we know C6H12O6 is 180 grams per mole, I'm going to do this all by proportions. 180 grams for every 1 mole. I only have 1/2 mole of this C6H12O6. So if 180 grams equals 1 mole, what would equal 1/2 mole? Well, that's going to have to be 90 grams. If you don't see it, cross multiply, 90 grams of C6H12O6. So if I have 90 grams of C6H12O6, I have 3.01 times 10 to the 23rd molecules of C6H12O6. And so that is a great introduction to Unit 7 molar calculations. That's week 12. Why is it great? Because I just delivered it. So I'll see you in class, guys.